Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Break Room. I'm your host, Lucinda Underwood. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Greg Marchand, COO of ShopPros. Today's episode, we are talking about culture and how to improve the culture at your shop. Greg, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Good to see you as always.
Thank you for having me here. I'm thrilled to pieces.
And welcome to Halifax.
Thank you. I love Halifax.
Have you been here before?
I have not, that I can remember. I've been to New Brunswick a whole bunch, but not Nova Scotia and certainly not Halifax.
Well, there you go. Well, big welcome. It's great to have you here. As I said, we're talking all about culture today, which I know is a topic that we're both quite passionate about. We've had conversations about this before and in the past. We also had a conversation earlier about, being able to identify your culture, right? And really how to identify issues with your culture. So what are your thoughts on that? The shop owners and managers that are listening, how would they go about really kind of assessing that and potentially identifying issues with their culture?
Culture is one of those really interesting things to me because bad culture when you see it, but you don't always recognize good culture when you have that. You walk into somebody else's shop and you look at what's going on and you go, wow, man, I wish we had these attitudes. I wish we had these customer friendly people. I wish we had, whatever it is. And you begin to think, well, what happened to my shop? Why don't we have this? And culture tends to, nobody sets out to create bad culture. Right? We don't get up in the morning and go, oh, I'm going to see if I can't ruin the shop culture today. We just kind of tend to let culture happen. And one shop owner said to me, we were walking outside and he turns around and he looks at his building and he goes, I don't understand how this happened, Greg. And it was just a general statement. It was, I can't find good people. I don't really like I like the people I have. I'm not really sure how it all ended up like this. And my comment to him was, don't feel bad about it. Most business owners as a whole, not just auto repair shop owners, but business owners, they don't put culture as part of their business plan.
Right.
They start diagnosing and repairing automobiles and trying to survive, and they don't put culture down as part of the business plan. Now, the caveat here is that if you're a 1 or 2 person shop, then you have an opportunity to form culture. Keep in mind that if you're just starting out and you've got 2 technicians and a service advisor, or it's you working the counter with 2 technicians, or whatever combination you can imagine, you have to be very intentional about what culture you want a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, because you're a group of friends right now working, really. And that's where culture goes awry. We become buddy-buddy. We all know what each other eats for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We hang out on weekends. We're all up in everybody's social media. And as we grow over time, all of a sudden we've got all these employees and mixes of personalities, and it's not a small organization anymore, and boom, we've got a culture that may or may not be working. Now, what does a culture that may or may not be working look like? It can look like a lot of things. Generally, by the time that we get involved in that, it's, why aren't we profitable? It's, we've got very inconsistent customer experience. We've got very inconsistent employee experience. We have trouble keeping people. We have trouble finding good people. We have challenges with productivity. So not so awesome culture, and I don't want to say it's bad culture. Very few shops have bad culture, but not so awesome culture, or maybe a culture that you don't necessarily want, can come from just lack of attention and lack of intentionality.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think I was just thinking when you were talking about some of those kind of common issues, I think it can sometimes, and again, in all business, it could be easy to identify the problem, but it's identifying the root cause is where the challenge comes in. And I think you're absolutely right. Culture only really then comes to attention once there's a problem.
It does.
Right?
Here's the other really interesting to me anyway, observation that I have about all small businesses. And again, I'm not just picking on auto repair shops. Most small businesses are built in the image of their owner. And that is something that every one of us business owners needs to be aware of. If you are somebody who struggles with attention and you jump from one shiny object to the next, you're going to walk into your shop at some point and go, why is it so disorganized? why are my people all over the place? And the reality is because they learned it from you. Your employees are always looking up to you, right? They're always looking up to you, and you're influencing them in ways you have no idea. You don't mean to. You don't set out to. You don't get up in the morning and think, oh, I'm going to see how I can influence my employees. But they're watching you, and your decisions, your reactions, your overreactions many times, it all becomes learned behavior, and that learned behavior becomes culture, because that's what culture is learned behavior. And so we do have to, above all else, recognize how do we ourselves influence the culture of the organization that we're building.
Right.
That's probably the hardest thing to do, right? Because nobody wants to look in the mirror and say anything but, dude, you're a rock star. Look at you go.
Yeah.
You know?
And that then comes down to self-awareness, doesn't it? And knowing, really knowing and understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, which you're right, it's not always the easiest. Sometimes it's not the easiest truth to face.
It's hard.
But the sooner you do it, the better, right? Before it gets to,
without a doubt,
before it really gets to that point. So let's talk a little bit about, obviously we've talked about some of the kind of signs that maybe there's a culture issue, some of the typical problems that can arise from poor culture. Now I want to talk and get your kind of tips on, okay, we've identified some problems. We know there's an issue there. How do we influence it, and how do we influence it for the good?
This is a challenge. A lot of shop owners will reach out to me and they'll say, I've got issues with culture. I don't like the way things are going. My people, or they'll single somebody out and say, this person or that person isn't, whatever isn't doing this, isn't doing that. And it's easy to see those things sometimes, right? Bad culture, bad customer experiences are easy to see and easy to point fingers at bad culture. Bad employee experiences or trouble finding employees, et cetera. The challenge then becomes not looking at this like I'm a technician. So here's the challenge. As a technician, as a mechanic, I look at things, I figure out what's wrong, and I fix it. So you've just looked at the culture of your organization. You've gone, I don't like it. This is wrong. This is bad. Rob doesn't have that over there. I want it to be different. So you feel like you diagnosed it, and now you're going to fix it. And the first reaction is to just go tell everybody to straighten up. just go do things the way I said to do them. Whatever that looks like. And the problem is the culture didn't get this way overnight. And you're not going to fix it overnight. To modify culture in any organization takes time. And nobody wants to hear this, but it can take years, depending on the size of your organization. And look, I mean, if you even think about family organizations that are multi-generational, right? You could have a second, third, or fourth generation family organization. Think of how long that culture was steeping in that family culture, right? Because the family dynamic affected the business culture. And now all of a sudden, maybe you step in as the great-grandson, and I've watched this and go, ooh, I don't like this. It's not modern. It's not what I want. It's not what my vision is. And yet you've got employees that have been there for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. How long is it going to take you to modify that culture? And that's probably worst case scenario, but it can be done. Rest easy, it can be done. If you're an organization that, maybe you've been running it for 5 years and you go, wow, this isn't fitting my vision, you're at a less significant disadvantage, but you've got to recognize it's going to take time. And the easiest thing for me to say, unless you're working with a coach, if you're working with a coach, that level of awareness and accountability is ridiculously important in changing culture, because you've got an outside third party that can help you evaluate culture, help you evaluate where the easy pieces to move are, and hold you accountable to that. If you want to tackle this yourself, the easiest way of doing it, and I say easy in quotes, right? Because it's hiring new people. Culture shifts with every new person you hire.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And when you think about that as to why does culture shift when I hire a new person? Oh, but Greg, it's a fresh start. The answer is obvious. Okay, but why is it a fresh start? You have a problem. You have a challenge. You want it to be different. What needs to be different? What type of person do you need to plug in here to help shift our culture? So what I'm always saying is hire for the culture that you want. Don't just hire bodies. Don't get desperate and say, can you fog a mirror? Great, because we're losing productivity. So come on in. I don't know if you're any good or not, but we're going to try you. That's not going to shift your culture. Well, it could. For better or worse, it could shift it.
Right.
But you've got to hire for the culture that you want. It's a long-term game. You can't just hire great people tomorrow. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. There's so many things I'm thinking kind of with everything that you're saying here about, the importance of that intention, having a plan, right? And having that discipline and consistency, knowing that it's not going to be an overnight fix, because you're absolutely right. The example you gave about, something's wrong, the first thing most people will do, okay, let's sit the team down, tell them this is not what I want, change.
Yep.
Even if they fully understood the changes that you want, it's still not going to be an overnight thing, but probably they don't even understand what you want at that point.
No,
right?
I think you're just telling them to do something differently.
Yeah.
And this too shall pass.
Yeah.
And habits are hard to change.
What about, going slightly off script here, but this is just an interesting conversation. But what about, you were saying about how all all employees obviously influence culture. What about how you raise awareness among those employees to really take responsibility, understand that?
Yeah.
Understand how they influence culture, because that can be a challenge sometimes.
Now we're dipping our toes. You're not kidding. A challenge sometimes. It's a challenge every darn day. Now we're dipping our toes into management. Now I have a saying that those of you that know me will just get really tired of hearing me say: nothing functions in isolation. Everything that we talk about fixing or not fixing or whatever it may be comes about from something else. And so if I want employees to recognize the part the role they play in building culture, that's a lot about consistency. How do we deal with one another? How do we talk to one another? How do I, as a business owner, talk to them? What does my tone of voice mean to them? What do they learn from that? Am I consistent in my decision making? Really positive culture comes about from consistency. And that's a really, really important word when you want to shift culture or maintain culture, because people don't mention maintaining culture. They come to me and they say, "Oh, we have an awesome culture. I'm not worried about that." You should be. That's the intentionality that we talk about here. You should be as intentional about maintaining the culture you have that you love as you are about getting to that culture. And so consistency is everything. If ownership or management does not offer up consistency in decision making, consistency in hiring, consistency in disciplining employees, consistency in offering vacation time, bonuses, awards, rewards, whatever it may be, you cannot create consistent culture.
Right.
So employees will generally recognize when they play an important role in culture when there's 5 or 6 of them that all kind of think the same way. They understand how the business operates. They get along really well, and somebody comes in that doesn't fit. And it's in their face. It's really noticeable. If you've got an inconsistent organization with how you deal with people and things and stuff that goes on during the day, employees aren't going to notice consistent culture because there is no consistency. And so they won't recognize what role they play in that consistency, or in that culture, I should say. If we're not intentional again and we just let things happen, we're going to get whatever we're going to get. And what you get may not be what you're hoping for. I say to service advisors all the time, if you don't set expectations, somebody else is going to set them. Well, isn't that how you build culture? You're setting a specific set of expectations. And if you don't set those expectations, employees are going to set those expectations themselves, and it may or may not be what you want it to be.
Well, it's going to end up with a whole load of different expectations, I would think, right?
Totally.
Yeah,
like
everyone has
10 or 12 different expectations around the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, really, just kind of, I guess, recapping what we've discussed so far, it really starts with that awareness, number one, of kind of what kind of culture have we built here, right?
And what do I want?
What do I want? And then you can start bridging the gap of how to get there and really understanding. And I think, this is an important point. You were talking about, that team that they have a great culture, and then someone comes in and shakes things up. You know, every high-performing team you ever come across, they have that synchronicity, right?
They do.
They know each other very well. They have that, like, culture is a crucial element of high performance.
Well, just think about, for the audience out there, think about your favorite sports team and the last time they won a championship. And I don't care what sport it is. Culture played a huge role in that, right? You can have all the talent in the world, but without the culture, you're not going to win a championship. It just doesn't happen.
Because you have to perform as a team.
Yes,
you know,
do.
there's no room for the individual.
Yes,
right?
you do.
Yeah.
Somebody, a client of mine a while ago called me up and he said, you know, I just had an epiphany. And I laughed and I said, oh, what's that? And he says, you know, you always call my shop an organization. And he says, I always just thought it was a fancy word you used for my shop. And he says, I realized this morning that that's not what you're talking about. What you're talking about is that everybody has a role to play. And if they don't play that role, there's disorganization that happens. And so if all the pieces are there and they're working together as a team, it is truly organized, and I truly have an organization. And I said, you know what, I never thought of it like that, but that's exactly why we call them organizations. And so to your point, yes, culture comes from every little piece. And the thing that comes to my mind is I was witness to a shop a while ago that they hired a new technician. And, of course, we won't say any names, but they hired a new technician, and the shop had a very, very strong culture. They worked well together. They were high performers. And this young man came in, and he was a high performer, did good work, but he was a mess. Couldn't keep his bay clean. Didn't have clean work habits. Was very disorganized. And the first thing that I saw happen was the shop took it upon themselves to try to police that. They would go to him and say, look, we clean our bay every night before we go home. You know, this is where we put the parts when we tear an engine apart. You know, here's what we do. Here are the containers. Here's this and that. And they tried to real quietly influence this young man. And then when that wasn't working, after 2 weeks, they came to the owner. Now, they had tried to take care of it on their own, to their credit. Nobody asked them to. And there was no leadership involved in doing that. They just looked at that and said, this isn't the way we do things.
Right. Doesn't fit.
Right. And then they went to the owner and said, what do we do? And he had multiple conversations with this young man. And when his habits didn't change, the owner decided we're going to let him go. Not because of the type of work he did and the quality of workmanship, but because he didn't fit the culture. And the owner recognized, if we let this slip, we lose what we have.
Right.
And so when I say it's built one person at a time, or it's changed or modified one person at a time, it can go either way, right?
But it's looking at that big picture too, because again, I think, you know, and especially, you know, if you're a leader in an organization or owner, you're busy, right? It's easy to look very kind of surface level, very black and white.
It is.
Does this person do good work? Do they show up on time? Like, do customers like them? Whatever, right? Whatever your criteria is, without sometimes taking that time to look at the bigger picture and say, okay, there's this one issue, might be a small issue now, but it's something that could really grow and have a big impact on the team.
And that's a really, really incredibly valid point. Something I worry about a lot every day, because we begin to rationalize what we have. I'm often saying to coaching clients, you cannot manage a business in fear. Any different than you can run your life in fear. You cannot manage a business in fear. And what I mean by that is, oh, but I can't let that person go because customers love him or her, and how would I ever replace them? You know, yeah, all right, I know that technician is the pain in the rear end, but he gives me 65 hours a week and can diagnose anything. I really don't want to lose them. What I've seen lately, because it's so hard to hire good people, is, well, you know, he's slow, he can't diagnose, he gives me 17 hours a week, but Greg is here every day. Really?
It's funny how those like standards drop.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, standard expectations drop, right?
Yeah.
And the standards just drop and drop and drop. And what you don't realize sometimes is that all eyes are on that person and how you're managing that situation. Because if you know, I'm looking at you and you're producing 17 hours a week, but you show up every day on time, what do I learn? As long as I show up every day on time, I'm going to produce 17 hours a week, and I'm going to be as good as Lucinda is. Yeah. And we wonder why our business doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
right? Recently an organization, multi-generational organization, they begin looking at numbers and they realize we've got technicians giving us 2 hours a day of productivity, 2 hours a day. How did this get here? How did this happen? Everybody was paid hourly. And that culture of steady employment happened. And so when you want to change something like that, you've got to change what's in it for me. What am I going to, if I'm going to show up and I'm going to get paid 8 hours, no matter how much I produce for you, why am I going to change?
Right.
And so your culture is going to sit right there and stay right there.
Yeah.
And you can't change that overnight. You can't come storming in and say, all right, we're switching a flat rate and we're going to pay everybody on their billable hours and that's that. You can't do that unless you want to replace everybody in your organization, because change is hard. So it's not only recognizing when you have a culture you don't want. It's not only saying we have to change this culture. It's this constant awareness
right.
and intentionality that really surround culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, for that exact example, speaking about that, what I was thinking when you were talking was, you get what you tolerate as well, right?
Good point.
And it is easy. Again, it's easy to have that thought process. Okay, it's hard to find people. It's hard to find qualified techs to hire. I'm just going to have to just put up with this because, I can't find anyone else. But then you really have to, again, it's that awareness and intentionality of saying, okay, what message does this send to the rest of the team?
And how does it fit with your bigger picture? I've seen organizations that had a good culture. It was a good culture. You could even call one of them a great culture. Customer satisfaction was top of everybody's mind. They worked well together. They were focused on the business. They were focused on helping each other out. You'd call it a good culture. The challenge was somebody had been there for 17 years, and this individual was really good to the customers. Customers liked this individual, but he wasn't growing the business. And so the business was good. I mean, it was a $3 million a year business. The business was good, but the owner wanted more. He wanted $5 million a year. And it was really hard to see past the group of people that he had that got him to $3 million. And this one individual, he could hide. He could hide under that $3 million, look reasonably good. But it wasn't until he chose to move on himself that the owner realized there were better people out there than he. And I call it climbing the ladder. Again, you don't fix this overnight. So you've got a shop full of unskilled technicians. It drives you nuts. They can't diagnose anything. They can, barely hang parts. What do? Well, I've taken shop owners and I've said, you're being the diagnostic person. You're going out in the shop. You're going to diagnose everything. And you're going to keep on advertising for technicians. And you're going to keep doing your interviews in the evening when you're not working, whatever it takes. And you hire that one person that's a little bit better than what you have. And you keep doing what you're doing. And you find the next person who's a little bit better than that last person was. And you climb that ladder to the point where all of a sudden you're making $4 million a year. You can't even remember those days when you had to work in the shop. So we tend to look at culture as it's here. It needs to be changed. Let's change it right now. And that's not the way it works. It changes one little step at a time with a lot of consistency. Yeah.
And I think consistency really is that key word in this. And, I think the other side of that example is if you have the owner or the manager working in the shop, doing what it takes, that's also setting the tone as well, which you would hope that then would lead to maybe elevating everybody else as well, right?
It's true. You also have to be very careful about a culture of, and I see this with shop owners a lot, I'm never going to ask anybody to do something I haven't done. Okay, that's great. But if you're a shop owner, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do every job as the business grows. And so what tone are you setting? If you're a shop owner and you're diving in to show everybody this is how we do it, you're also neglecting your business. Because if you're a shop owner and you're not uniquely qualified to be doing something, you shouldn't be doing it. And if you pay technicians to diagnose and you pay technicians to R&R, then you probably shouldn't be diagnosing and R&Ring. You should probably be in your office working on those uncomfortable things that lead to stronger culture,
right?
Like employee reviews. And so there is that line of let me stay doing what I'm comfortable doing and rationalizing it under let me show everybody how to do this versus, you know what? I may not be entirely comfortable with marketing. I may not be entirely comfortable with interviewing people. I may not be entirely comfortable writing these employee reviews, but it's something I need to get comfortable with because it leads to solid culture. And oftentimes owners can't rebuild the culture of their organization because they're sticking to what they know instead of learning the new skill sets because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Well, you know what? When you're uncomfortable, you know you're growing.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
You were speaking a minute ago about, great culture, and you mentioned a particular shop that you'd worked with, and you said, they had a good culture. They, on the surface, they had a great culture. And I want to kind of finish our conversation with this topic. What does a great culture look like? How can you spot a great culture? But also, what are the foundations that have to be there in order to achieve greatness?
So let me answer that part first. Consistency is number one. Consistency is number one. And then on the other end of that, to answer your first question, it's rare, but it happens. And it's what I always strive for when I work with auto repair shops. There's phenomenal culture when people are knocking on the door wanting a job there. When you don't have to advertise for service advisors, for technicians, for any position in your organization, when other people from other organizations are knocking on your door saying, yeah, do you have any openings? You have a phenomenal culture because people around town are talking about it. Employees are talking about it, especially. Customers are talking about it, especially. So that takes consistency. That takes hiring the right people to build the culture that you want. So you'll know it when people want to be a part of that culture.
That's such a great answer and so true. And I think the same could probably apply as well for, if you're not having to work too hard to get new customers either.
It's true.
Right? Because again, from a customer, obviously, again, we've had lots of conversations. I work a lot in customer experience, and customers really know.
They do.
You walk in somewhere, you walk into a shop or an automotive dealership or something like that, you pick up on that stuff immediately.
You feel it.
Yes.
Right? You feel it. Sometimes you can put your finger on it, sometimes you can't, but you feel it. As soon as you walk in the organization, you feel it. You're right.
Yeah.
You're really right.
Yeah. And it makes it either a great place to do business or it makes it a bit uncomfortable sometimes, right? So if you've got happy employees and happy customers, you're probably doing a pretty good job with the culture.
I agree.
Yeah. I love that. This has been a great conversation. I love these kind of topics. Before we totally wrap up, any other thoughts to share? Is there anything we didn't cover on this subject that you want to dive into?
Probably so much, but I think my biggest message is if you're listening to this and you don't like your culture and you feel really overwhelmed by all of this, don't be. It's not. Don't feel like you've created a monster that you can't get out from under. Take one little thing at a time. And if it has to wait until you need to hire a new employee, then let it wait until you need to hire a new employee. At the very least, get consistent. Have some shop meetings on a consistent basis. Every Tuesday, have a shop meeting. Mondays and Fridays are no good for it, but have a shop meeting. Keep it to 15 minutes. Figure out what you want to talk about. That kind of consistency there begins to help you. And then the next time you need a new employee, go about it with intention. Think about, what do I want? What would my ideal employee be? And don't hire anybody until you find that person. And it could take months. But you know what? If you're really serious about rebuilding culture, it's going to take months anyway.
Yeah.
So
patience.
Be patient. If you're trying to rebuild culture, be patient, for sure.
I love that. And what a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Greg. I enjoyed our conversation as always.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Break Room. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and don't forget to share with your network and leave us a review.